Hi everybody, it's Julessa again, and in today's video we're going to take the basket setting that we made last week and turn it into a ring, and then we're going to set the stone into the prongs. So let's get started. So I decided to turn this basket setting into a ring. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut the opening to set the basket setting. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take my calipers and measure the width of the basket, lock that in place on my calipers, and in this case it's 7.5, which is what we should expect considering the size of the rings that we use to actually make the basket itself. So now I'm going to mark my ring shank, and one of the things you have to realize too is this basket setting is straight up and down. It's not at a taper. So what we need to do is cut out of the ring a straight up and down section so that we can notch it out and create kind of notches to hold this together. So the first thing I want to do is mark it around the area where my solder joint is. Okay, then we're going to cut that section out. And I'm cutting it straight down on the joint because I want that straight side. Same thing on this side. So now I should be able to put this in here and be fairly tight. It's actually a little loose, but we can fix that by squeezing it together a little bit. There we go. Now that's going to fit by tension. The only problem is right now it's going to keep slipping out. So what I need to do is cut a couple of notches in the edges in here so that it'll grip onto the side of the wire right there. So I'm going to go back to my tapered burr, or sorry, my cylinder burr. I'm going to go ahead and slide those two notches out and fit so that I can fit this basket. Okay, so let's try the fit here. Perfect. It snapped right in there. Now it's being held by tension. Now I cut my prongs off kind of long because I wanted to make sure I had enough prong on there to do the stone setting, but this is the easiest way to get it set inside of a ring. You want to cut some notches just like you did for the ring, for the jump rings to make the setting. You want to cut notches in the ring itself, that way it holds on to itself while you're soldering it. And this one looks pretty good, so we're going to go ahead and take this over to the soldering board and solder it. Okay, we're excuse me, at the soldering board. I'm checking to make sure that it's straight with the ring shank, and it looks pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it upside down and set it in a spot in my board where it's going to stay straight up and down. I'm going to go ahead and flux it. I'm going to use medium solder this time since everything else was hard solder. I don't want my parts to come apart. I'm checking it to make sure the solder went all the way through. Let's get closer on my... Yep, that looks really good. Okay, so now I'm going to quench and pickle it and clean it up, and we can get ready to set the stone. Okay, the ring is cleaned up. I've got it all polished. Before you set your stone, you want to make sure that the ring is polished and the setting is polished. That way you get the perfect amount of bounce back with the light. This is the stone we're going to set. This is the 8mm cubic zirconia. We're also going to use either a 1.5mm ball burr along with a 6mm ball burr to open up the seat, or instead of using the smaller ball burr, you can use a hart burr. I prefer to use the hart burr just because that's my preference, but either one will work. Or if you have a cylinder burr, you can also use a cylinder burr. So the first thing we want to do is open the seat for the coulee and the girdle and the pavilion of the stone to sit. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up now. And the reason you have to do that is because you used round jump rings to create the basket, and you need to make it so that it's tapered so that the bottom of the stone will fit. So I'm going to use my 5mm or 6mm ball burr to create a seat at the bottom. Whew. Now the next thing I want to do is take my hart burr or your ball burr or your cylinder burr and create the notches in my prongs. And essentially what we're trying to do is get a straight prong to be curved or angled just like the side of the stone, so that when you press the prongs onto the stone, it holds it tightly without smashing it or breaking it. So because this is a square, I want to actually make my notches diagonally on the actual prongs because our stone is round, right? So we need to make the prongs fit the stone by cutting it in the diagonal angle instead of straight up and down that way, because the stone is sitting in the center here, not on the side. First thing I want to do, actually, you can eyeball this, but you might want to make a measurement. I generally will do about 1mm or 2, because you want the stone to sit as low as possible. And this is at about 2mm. I'm gonna go 1.5. Oop, wrong way. There we go. And I'm gonna mark the insides. Now I know where to start my hart burr. So what I'm doing is I'm cutting a notch that looks like this, and I'm also creating space for the pavilion of the stone to actually set without being caught up on the sides of the prongs itself. And I'm cutting about 2/3 of the way through the prong. You don't want to go too far into the prong. You want to make it about a 2/3 to a half, or half to 2/3. It's important to have enough magnification to be able to look to see if you're hitting your marks. So what I'm doing is I'm making a motion where I'm straight up and down, but I'm also cutting the prong like this so that I'm making room for the pavilion. Okay, so now I'm going to try and test the stone to see if it'll snap in place, and that's what we want it to do, is to snap in place. And it's not quite ready yet. What you can also do is pull your prong back a little bit. I'll get my pliers here. Sometimes you have to make room from the top of the plier. You don't want to pull it out too far. Let's try it again. If it doesn't set in there, it's most likely because your seat is not deep enough. This is the hard part, is getting the stone in there. Well, it's not quite deep enough. So what I need to do is take my ball burr and open it up some more. And actually, I'm going to take a smaller ball burr. That way I can get into the area a little bit easier. So this one's about a 5.5. 5. I'm not cutting the prongs, I'm cutting down in the setting. Oops. Let's try this again. A little bit closer. So now I'm going to work on cutting my prongs a little bit more. Take your time with this. You don't want to rush in it because you can cut your prongs too much. And then you'll have to start all over again because there's no way of fixing that. Okay, let's try this one more time. Let's see, let's put it upside down, try it this way. Okay. Get my brass pusher here. Okay, it's not ready yet. What I'm checking for is around the girdle to make sure that I've got space, and I can see on this prong here I need to cut a little more out of it. Just take your time with it, don't rush it, because if you do, you're going to end up with a crooked setting or a setting that breaks your stone. Okay, I'm going to pull my prongs out just a little bit more, because my seats are cut. My settings are cut. I just don't want to break the stone to get it in there. There we go. Just needed to open it up a little bit. So now they're sitting. The stone is low and sitting on my setting rings here. And that's exactly what I want it to do. So now what I need to do is actually squeeze these prongs this way and this way. That way I can cut off any of the excess prong that I've got up here. I have a pair of pliers that look like this. They're prong setting pliers or stone setting pliers. If you don't have those, you can use these kind of pliers. And all you're going to do is squeeze together. Not all the way, just enough to hold the stone. Squeeze together. You want to check your setting, make sure it's level. Mine is level. Now I'm going to take my prong pusher that looks like this, and I'm going to push my prongs in from opposite sides. And what I'm doing is I'm closing this section of the cut down onto the stone so that the girdle sits in my cut area, not too tightly and not pressing against the stone, but just enough to hold it in place. So you can see now my prongs are just a little bit pushed in, and that's how you want it to be because you're going to cut them off and then round them. I'm checking with my magnifiers to make sure there are no gaps in the setting part. There's no gaps on that one. No gap there. No gap there. And no gap there. So now what I can do is clip these off. And generally what I do, I clip them off about the same height as the table of the stone. This is the table. I cut them off just above the table or right at the table of the stone. And I just cut those with a pair of pliers or cutting pliers, just like this. Okay, I got those cut off. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a cup burr to trim down and make these so that they don't stick and pull on clothing. And I want to get a cup burr that actually matches the diameter of my wire. Otherwise it's going to tear, and we don't want it to tear, we want it to cut cleanly. You try not to touch the stone. What you can't get with the cup burr, you can always use a polishing mop or a rubber silicone polisher to get the rest of it off. And this one, I'm not getting that all with my cup burr, so I'm going to have to use my polisher. Get them pretty close. Now the other thing I like to do when I get my setting done is I actually take my pliers, my setting pliers, and I'll just press down a little bit on the prong just to make sure that it's completely set. Oops, wrong way. I recommend, if you're going to be doing a lot of basket setting, I recommend getting a pair of these pliers. It makes life a lot simpler. Okay, so now what I need to do is just repolish the top of my prongs and check if there's any marks underneath and clean those up. Other than that, it's pretty much done. So I'm gonna go ahead and cup burr this one just a little bit more. And pull out my polisher. I use the blue silicone first, and normally I'd put a mask on, but since I'm talking to you, I'm not gonna wear a mask, otherwise you won't be able to hear me. And I'm just gonna go over it lightly and clean off any of the marks that were left over from when I clipped off the top of the prong. You want to make sure you're taking off any sharp areas as well, because you don't want it to catch on clothing and snag. And the test of that is just to put your arm up here or stick it on a cloth and feel it. I've got a section right there that's a little bit sharp. Just going to round that off. The nice thing about those prong setting pliers is that they generally don't leave any tool marks if you hold it correctly. And like I said, if you don't have those pliers, you can use your regular chain nose pliers or your long chain nose or your bent pliers and take the prong, lay one leg underneath and take the top one and just squeeze. And do it evenly all the way around, and I suggest doing a little bit at a time. That way you don't crush the stone or you don't make the setting crooked. That looks pretty good. So that's how I set my basket settings. If hopefully you can see the detail that I did. I hope I explained it well enough for you to understand how to get the stone set in there. If you have questions, please leave them down below in the comments section. I'd be more than happy to answer them. But other than that, I'd say this project is finished. In this video, we took the basket setting from the last video and turned it into a ring and then set the stone into the prongs. Hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave me comments below. I'd love to answer them. Also, don't forget to give me a like and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. Bye, everybody.